So again, thank you all for coming. It's very nice we get this opportunity to hear about how great and wonderful and benevolent Srila Prabhupada was. And even today he's still bestowing his mercy to all of us devotees, whether we be direct disciples or his grandchildren, and now we even have great-grandchildren coming to Srila Prabhupada's class. Yesterday I was talking about the Kumbh Mela festival. This was the first festival in 1970, and at this festival, this is when Srila Prabhupada was reading a letter to us, and in the letter the person had said that Singapore would be a good place for preaching. And prior to this, from time to time, I wondered, Srila Prabhupada had called ISKCON the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So sometimes I wondered, why did he say International Society? Because at that time we only had temples in America. There were only temples in America and in, of course, Canada, but it's still in North America area. But when Srila Prabhupada said, who will go to Singapore? And I raised my hand and said, I will go. And then another boy from Montreal, his name was Hanuman, he was a French-Canadian devotee, he said he would go also. And then another devotee says, Srila Prabhupada, I want to go to Iran. I think it was a Treya Rishi or someone like that, I forget exactly. And someone else says, I'll go to Italy. And then one by one, different devotees volunteered to go to these different countries. And then Srila Prabhupada said, yes, and Brahmananda Swami, you will go to Africa. And so myself and Hanuman, that same day we got on a bus and a train and went to Calcutta, and we flew to Burma. So from Calcutta to Burma, it was a very short flight, and we stayed in Burma for a couple of days. So at that time you could only stay in Burma for 1 week. That's all the longer they would give a visa for. But eventually we arrived in Singapore, and there were two other devotees there. One his name was Amoga. He was from Los Angeles. And then Bali Mardan. He was from New York. So there were four of us at that time. And in Singapore, we didn't get a very good reception. Everyone that has been to Singapore, they know that Singapore is a very strict country, so they wouldn't allow us to do Sankirtan, and we felt that we would be wasting our time to stay in Singapore, so we decided to go to Malaysia. So we were waiting for a shipment of books to come. So I remained in Singapore, and the other devotees, they went into Malaysia, and I had to wait for the books to arrive, and then I rented a car and joined the other party. And we didn't have any specific plans on how we were going to execute this mission that Prabhupada had sent us on. But we did what we knew how to do, and that was have kirtans and chant Hare Krishna and speak a little bit from what we understood about our philosophy. We would speak and hopefully someone would invite us to their home, let us stay in their house, because we had no place to stay and such as that. But at one program near Kuala Lumpur is the capital of Malaysia, one Indian lady, she was Malaysian citizen, her name was Kamala Devi. She was a lawyer, and her husband, I forgot his name, he was a doctor, but they were very much taken by us. So we had impressed her so much that she said, I want to give you some land so you can build a temple. So she was in the process of developing a piece of land, building apartment buildings and little stores and things such as that, which at that time was far, far, far out of the main city of Kuala Lumpur. So at that time there was just a 2-lane highway going from Singapore up to Thailand, just a 2-lane highway. And so her property was on that land. And so immediately we sent a telex to Srila Prabhupada. He was here in India, most probably Calcutta, or probably Calcutta. And we told him that this lady wanted to donate some land for us to build a Krishna temple. And so Srila Prabhupada was very, 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 very happy to receive this news. And he sent us back a telegram, and he said, thank you so much for helping me to spread Lord Chaitanya's movement. And I'm going to come to Malaysia, and I'm going to join your Sankirtan party. And so this was a very rewarding experience, because normally, for those of you, if your Guru Maharaj is coming to a city some distance from where you're at that time, you will make an effort to drive or fly or go there to meet and to see your spiritual master. But if you do service that's so much appreciated by your Guru Maharaj that he comes to see you. So this is for me, this was a very rewarding accomplishment for us. So Srila Prabhupada arrived in Malaysia, and we had to make arrangements for him where he was going to stay, because these Indians, they ate meat. They were meat eaters. So Srila Prabhupada wouldn't stay in their house. But they took Srila Prabhupada to the piece of land that they were developing, and the lady told Prabhupada that you choose any place that you see that you want, and I will give you this land. And so Prabhupada surveyed the property, and he chose a very beautiful spot, which was on the side of a hill, and then it was overlooking the land that had been cleared away, ready for development, down to the main highway. And Prabhupada says, I want this land here. And then the lady says, okay. And then Srila Prabhupada told the lady, he said, I want you to build a hut, a small hut on this land, so we can begin worshipping immediately. So it's quite common. You see that in India, along the highways, in an island, in the highway, you see a little tiny temple, usually Hanuman or Ganesh or something like that. They build these temples, and once that temple was built, then, and if someone is there doing puja, it's considered a temple and it can't be taken down. So Srila Prabhupada told this lady to build this hut right here, and we will begin doing worship on this land. And she agreed to this, and then we had to arrange programs for Srila Prabhupada. And so first we went to Kuala Lumpur temple. They had many Subramaniam temples. Subramaniam is Kartikeya, Lord Shiva's son. And the program was that someone had to make arrangements for Srila Prabhupada and make arrangements for the program. So I always would go in the front of our Sankirtan party to the next town and make arrangements for place for Prabhupada to stay and arrange for programs, and then they would be back at the previous location doing kirtan, and when they finished they would come to the next city, and this when they came, then I would have some darshan with Prabhupada, but then I would have to leave and go again to the next city and make the same arrangements for where Srila Prabhupada was going to stay, find a temple or a hall where we could have a program and try to meet people and arrange a nice program for Srila Prabhupada. So this went on for some time. We visited many cities in Malaysia, and we held many programs, and then ultimately we ended up in Penang. So Penang is almost the last city in Malaysia, and then it's up near the border of Thailand. And so we stayed, in each of these cities for a certain number of days and did programs. Prabhupada would speak, and eventually it was time. We went back to Kuala Lumpur, to this place where the lady had arranged to build a hut. And so when we got there, the little room, not even like as big as this room, is maybe like from there to here, just a small little hut with a toilet, an outdoor toilet, and such as that. And when Srila Prabhupada saw that, he said that somebody must stay here and begin doing worship. Of course, we didn't have any deities, we just had pictures. And so I volunteered. I said, I'll stay, Prabhupada. And then he says, okay, that's very good. So you build an altar. So I built like a 3-tiered altar for Panchatattva picture, Sri Prabhupada, Bhakti Siddhanta, and then we put Krishna book on there. And then Srila Prabhupada told me, he says, you must do 2 artis a day. Not just incense, but you must do 2 full artis a day, because he wanted to make this an official place of worship. And so I agreed to this, and then the remainder of the party left. So Srila Prabhupada was on his way to Australia. So he had a servant with him, and they had brought a set of deities. I don't remember where they took him, maybe to Melbourne or somewhere, Perth or one of those places. And Bali Mardan also accompanied with Srila Prabhupada to Australia. And Hanuman, the French-Canadian devotee, and another boy, a Chinese boy, who we had made a devotee. He was the first Asian, or the first Chinese devotee. Later his name was given Lalita Krishna. But he and Hanuman, they went to India. They left and they went back to India. And the other boy, he went to Indonesia. So there I was. I was in Malaysia by myself in this hut, and trying to fulfill Srila Prabhupada's wishes and do arti twice a day. And first I had to build the altar, but then I built the altar, and then I would perform artis. But it's important to also know that we had no money. So when Srila Prabhupada came to America, he had like $7, but I didn't even have $7. I had zero, nothing, not even 1 penny. And so in order to get food, I would have to hitchhike from where the property was and where my hut was into the city, and then go to the marketplace and beg the merchants for any types of vegetables or beans or rice or whatever they had, oil, and then hitchhike back and continue with my program, making food for the deities, cooking, and there was no association. I was the only one. I was there, and like I said, it was on the side of a mountain, and it was a very good time to get a taste for chanting. So I would just spend all day long chanting japa, just chant, 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 chant. And during this time, Srila Prabhupada had been corresponding with this Indian woman, and eventually she said that she wasn't going to give the land because she was a kripana, right, a miserly person, and so she said, I'm not going to give you the land. And so Srila Prabhupada told me, he says, you don't have to stay in that hut anymore, but I want you to stay in Malaysia, and I want you to stay there and preach. So at least at that time I had shelter because I was staying in this hut, but when she wouldn't give the land, then I didn't have anything. So I didn't have anywhere to go, and I just sort of followed Srila Prabhupada's footprints that he had come and where places he had gone, and then I would hitchhike from one location to the next and meet with the Indian communities there, try to do a program. It's very difficult with just one person, and I was only a young boy. Maybe at that time I was 20 years old, 21 years old, but I had to, I had to fulfill the wishes of my Guru Maharaj. So I traveled from one place to the next, and we know that sometimes Prabhupada would say, sometimes a devotee may stay in a palatial palace, and sometimes he may sleep under a tree. So there were many cases where I had nowhere to stay, and I would sleep outdoors under the tree, and I got malaria because, of course, a mosquito bit me, and I got malaria. I became sick, but I continued, and then at one point, my visa was finishing, and then he told me, go to Thailand. So you go to Thailand and you preach in Thailand. So Thailand was the same. I had no money. I had just enough money to buy a train ticket to get into Thailand. Yeah, but when I got there, I met one Chinese man who, there's many Buddhists in Thailand, and they wear saffron robes, and so I was wearing saffron, and he was making soy sauce. So he let me stay in his soy sauce factory, and I stayed there for some time, but then I had to go back to Malaysia. And once I got back into Malaysia again, what to do. I had to somehow think of ways to communicate with these people and do whatever I could to get them to be enthusiastic. And at one point, Srila Prabhupada says, now I want you to go to Hong Kong. He says, I have a young couple in Hong Kong, and they need some association. So you go to Hong Kong and you give them your association. So again, I just go to the airport, and at the ticket counter, my ticket was waiting for me. Someone had bought a ticket for me. And I flew to Hong Kong, and maybe you know Borijan and Jagatarini. So they were a young married couple, and they were in Hong Kong. And so I went there, and I stayed for as long as I could, but then I had to leave Hong Kong, and so Burijan had bought me a ticket back to Singapore, and he bought a ticket on a freighter, and it was quite an experience, because the freighter was an old Chinese freighter, and they had one cabin on that, something like what Srila Prabhupada stayed on going on the Jaladuta, but in the bottom part of the ship there were all old Chinese people. So Singapore allowed anyone who was over 60 years old to go back to mainland China to visit families. Young people couldn't go because they didn't want them to become influenced, because Mao Zedong was in charge at that time. So I went into my cabin, and it seemed nice. It was nice, and as the ship turned and left the harbor in Hong Kong, then suddenly they started broadcasting this propaganda. Chinese, everything was in Chinese. I couldn't understand what they were saying. But then they went, every picture, was it like the picture of a tree or a waterfall or something like that? They turned it over, and then on the other side was a big picture of Mao Zedong. And so Mao Zedong's picture was everywhere, and they were blasting this propaganda. And I had more freedom. Those people had to stay below deck. They couldn't go out and walk around. So I went to the galley, the kitchen, and I saw that it was so terrible and dirty, and I made a decision. I said, I'm not going to eat any food from there. I wouldn't eat anything. And so each day they gave me one can of condensed milk, just a little can of milk like this, and that's all I had to eat. But what made it even more difficult, it was that once the ship went out into the China Sea, there was some typhoon came. So a big typhoon came, so the ship had to go off course and sit and wait for the typhoon to pass. And then as soon as that typhoon passed, then another typhoon came. And then after that one, then another one. So 3 typhoons came, and the ship couldn't move. And so finally the ship came to Singapore. It'd been maybe 10 days at sea. And when I got to Singapore, I was, getting ready to get off the boat, but the immigration came, and they came by a launch, a boat to the ship, and they were checking the crew members, and they checked me and my passport. So I thought there wouldn't be any problems, but at that time, of course, they had only walkie-talkie, ship-to-shore telephone. So he called to his office, and they said, after some time, they said that I couldn't enter Singapore. So I had been put on the blacklist, and I couldn't enter. So in Singapore, myself and also Srila Prabhupada, we were put on the blacklist. And so Prabhupada couldn't go to Singapore, and even today I can't go to Singapore, so I couldn't go. So I had to stay on the boat, and my ticket was only to Singapore, but I had no money to pay for further passage going to Malaysia. So the captain of the ship, what could he do? He couldn't just throw me in the ocean. So he took me to the next port, and when the boat landed, I had to get off, and then there I was again. I was in Malaysia. I didn't have anywhere where to go. I didn't have any money, but I still had this mission to fulfill. How to preach to these people, and I had an idea that some things that Srila Prabhupada had said in lectures or in discussions, they had an impact on the the devotees in different ways. And one thing I remembered was that Prabhupada says that if there's a rich man, you cannot just walk into his office and meet him. But if you see this same rich man in the park, and he has his dog with him, and you go to the dog and you pat the dog on the head, and the dog wags his tail, and then in this way you have breached that barrier between you and the rich man, and you become his friend. And so I had to think, what was the most dearest thing to all of these Indians that were there? So if I could find out how to approach them in this way. So I thought, of course, the thing that they loved most was their children. And so I had to devise some way through the children to get to the parents. So I would collect a group of the children ranging from ages 5 till 10 or 11 or something like this, and I would say, we're going to do a puppet show. So first I taught them all of the prayers that we sing, and how to play the kartals, and then they could dance, and then we made puppets. So I took a balloon, and I blew the balloon a little bit, so it was about maybe this big around, and then you tie the balloon, and then you put on the outside of the balloon paper mache. You know paper mache? Yeah? Yeah, so I would put paper mache, and then someone would paint the face of Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, and then we'd take wool that you use for making sweaters, and make a wig, and then by this time everything is dry, so all the air you let out of the balloon, but then you make a dress like this, where you could put your hand in and manipulate the puppet. And some of the kids, they would do some drawings on the wall, the back of this, and the first one we did was Jagai and Madhai. So we made these puppets of Jagai and Madhai and Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, and the kids would, put on this show, and they would know the story of Jagai and Madhai, and the parents, were forced to come. They tell their mother and father, "You have to come to our program," and the mothers had to cook. So the mothers had to cook a feast for all of the people. So the temples were always full, and we would do these puppet shows of Krishna Leela or Lord Chaitanya's Leela, and then afterwards I would give a class and I would speak. So in this way I was able to bridge that problem of how to communicate and preach. So if one makes an effort, then Krishna will give you the intelligence. So I was there, and I did this type of program, but then Malaysia is a Muslim country, and it's against the law to preach to Muslims. You can preach to the Chinese or the Buddhists or the Hindus, but you couldn't preach to the Muslims. And in Malaysia they have a sultan. A sultan is like a king, but they have 7 states in Malaysia, and so one of the sultans for that state, he is the number 1 sultan for like 7 years or 10 years or something like that, and then they rotate. But the main sultan heard that I was in Malaysia, and so he sent his chief of police to find me, and then they found me, and they took me to the Sultan's palace. So his palace was gorgeous, like you see in Krishna book, with fabulous marble pillars, and he was dressed in very expensive Muslim attire, and I knew that it was against the law to preach to him, but he was nice, very nice man, and we began to discuss about God, and so I didn't want to be forceful, but we spoke for some time, and we came to an agreement that if you're practicing a religion and it develops love of God in your heart, then it's a good religion. And so he agreed to that, and then he let me go, and so then I went out again, and then I was there again, again fending for myself, and I got a most probably it was a telex or something, but Prabhupada wanted me to go to Indonesia. So the boy Amoga, who was in Indonesia, he had gone there earlier, he wanted to get married. And so Srila Prabhupada wanted me to go to Indonesia now and replace him. So this was a new country and a different environment. Of course, they're also Muslim. Indonesia has the largest population of Muslims in the world, but the Indians who were there wanted their children to learn about their heritage, and so they couldn't teach a class in their school called Hinduism, but we devised a name called moral science, and so under this guise, then I worked in their school. It was called the Hindu Sabha, the name of the school. So I worked in that school teaching, and these kids were a little older, and they were spoiled. Of course, the technology that we have today is, it's unbelievable. But even then, they were like young pre-teens or teenage kids. So it was really hard for me to teach. So I stayed in Indonesia until the end of the school semester, and then they bought me a ticket to India, and so I was really excited because I was going to go back to be with the devotees. And so I arrived in Calcutta. Srila Prabhupada was there, and the other devotees were there, and we had the deities in the Calcutta temple, and so for me it was a big relief being back amongst the devotees. And so we had arranged a program. We were going to go to the temple in front of Srila Prabhupada's house. It was a family called Malik. Malik was the name of the family, and Prabhupada grew up, and he would play. We heard he had a Rath Yatra card, and he played games and such as that. And so they had arranged a program at that temple. And so we went to the temple, and as is customary, on this side, the deities are here, and so on this side the women sat, and also the male guests sat, and then on this side all of the male Hare Krishna devotees were sitting, but most of them were sitting some distance. And Prabhupada was sitting here, like where I'm sitting, and I sat right next to Prabhupada, right here like this. And Prabhupada began the program, and he started by, reacquainting himself with all of these people. They were kids that are, they're all older now, but they were his childhood friends. And so, he's being as diplomatic as he was. He would start with the oldest, and they had pet names they would call each other, and of course they were speaking all in Bengali, so we didn't understand. But he started with the oldest, and then he'd speak to her for a little bit, and then he would go to the next person, and then the next person, and the next person. And one by one, Prabhupada was, rekindling a relationship with his friends from when he was a young boy. And finally, he came to this one man. And this man, he was older. He must have been one of the grandchildren at that time, but he was older, and then he spoke English. And he looked at Srila Prabhupada and he said, "Oh, Swamiji, you have to help me. I'm having such a difficult time. I have such a big problem. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Please, can you help me with my problem?" And then Prabhupada said, "What is your problem?" And he says, "Oh, I have to find a husband for my daughter. And it's so difficult. We've met with so many people. We've tried in so many ways to, and he kept going on. And I'm sitting next to Srila Prabhupada, and I'm thinking, just be quiet. Just let Prabhupada continue. He's doing this as a formality. It's just forget about it." But this guy was very persistent, and then he kept going on. "But I have to, it's my duty as a father. I have to find a suitable husband for my daughter." And Prabhupada was getting impatient, and then this man, he was sitting there, and then he gestured to the girl sitting next to him and says, "I have to find a husband for my daughter." And then I looked at the girl, and she was ugly, really ugly, and fat, and really, and then I'm thinking, "Oh man," I said, he says, you better get used to this girl. She's going to be living in your house forever. You'll never get her out of your house." And I didn't say anything like that, but that's the way I was thinking. And he says, "What can I do, Swamiji? I have to find a husband." And Prabhupada was so impatient, and then he raised his hand and he says, "Don't worry. Your daughter will marry this boy." And then Prabhupada pointed to me, and he said, and then I went, "Oh my God, what?" And then I was thinking, "Prabhupada, how can you do that to me?" So this Leela, Prabhupada chastised me because he knew what I was thinking, and in the same way he was able to pacify that that man. So I call this killing two birds with one stone. So Prabhupada was very intuitive, where he knew things like that were going on. And so for the next few days, I was so nervous because anytime a car would drive by the temple, then I thought, "Oh, if they come, they take me to their house, and I got to live with these people. They don't speak English, and this fat woman, what am I going to do? So fortunately, they didn't come. So I was able to escape that predicament. So we had one more experience at the Malik Temple, and this was the first Rath Yatra festival that we had in Calcutta. And so the devotees, they all wanted to go on the festival, the cart, follow the cart, because Srila Prabhupada was going to ride on the cart. But there had been threats from the Naxalites. Naxalites are the communist party in Bengal, that they were going to interfere with our Rath Yatra festival. But Prabhupada didn't go on the cart, but someone had to go and cook the feast. And so I volunteered, and I went to the temple, and they had, coal stoves, the stoves. So I put in cow dung and then coal or wood or something, and these big pots, and I began cooking. I made dal, and then a couple sabjis, and then sweet rice, and then different preparations, and everything was going along very nicely. And I wanted to make pushpan rice. So pushpan rice is kind of a fancy rice that has peas in it, and chopped up carrots, and paneer, fried paneer. You put this in there and cook it. And so everything was done except I didn't have any paneer. And so I went to the marketplace, which was nearby, and I didn't know the word paneer. All I knew was the word cheese. So I was wearing a gamcha, and my body was covered with soot and ashes, and I was running up and down in the marketplace, shouting, "Cheese, cheese, cheese!" And they were thinking, this guy is puggled, So then I saw one man. He had just made a batch of cheese, so it was still in the water and it hadn't been strained yet. So I said, yes. So I bought it, and then I took it back, and then I was going to try and drain all of the whey out of the thing and make it into pakka paneer. And so time was running short, and the Rath Yatra cart arrived, and the devotees were there, and they took Lord Jagannath, Baladev and Subhadra, and they put them on the altar next to the house deities there, and they had a big kirtan, and then Srila Prabhupada began to speak. So I'm still in the kitchen trying to make paneer out of this, but the kirtan was ending, Srila Prabhupada's lecture was ending, and so I didn't know what to do. So I just took the wet cheese and I put it in the rice and mixed it together, and then it was time to eat. So the men were lined up on this side and the women were lined up on this side, and then the servers, first they gave a plate to Srila Prabhupada, And he began to eat, and then they started serving to everyone. And then Srila Prabhupada said, "Who cooked this feast?" And then one of the brahmacharis, he says, "I think Gopal cooked it." And then I had come out of the kitchen and I was hiding behind a pillar, and I wanted to see Prabhupada, how he responded to my food. And then he says, "Where is Gopal?" And then I came out and I says, "Here I am, Prabhupada." And he says, "Oh, this is very good khichdi." So again, I think he was complimenting me, because he knew that I had made a big effort to do everything nicely. But the other foods were all nice. Everything was very nice. And so we run out of time again. I mean, for stories on Srila Prabhupada, I have many stories. But we'll stop. So if anyone has a question, anything they want to, yes?
A comment and a question. Usually we think about when devotees have undergone hardship, it's like when they're trying to establish Krishna consciousness in places like Russia, with Bhakti Tirthamaj traveling on the train and different things happening like that. But when we hear about what you went through, being dropped in the middle of nowhere, not knowing which way to turn, where to go, I realize that the newer generation of devotees have such a debt to the older disciples of Prabhupada that directly went in.
Well, I'll tell you one story.
Yeah.
This happened most of you have been to Mayapur, and I'm sure that in Mayapur you enjoyed yourselves. But there was a time in Mayapur where nobody would go, because Mayapur was such a desolate place. From one end of the Bhaktisiddhanta road to the other end, there was nothing, just empty fields, rice fields and such as that. And on our land we had Srila Prabhupada's Bhajan Kutir. And so only 4 devotees would stay in Mayapur. So myself, Jayapataka Swami, Jananivas, and Prabhas. Prabhas was an Indian boy. So we were the only 4 devotees who stayed there. Anyone else who would come to Mayapur, they would stay in the morning and they would leave, because it was such an austere place. But one day we had just finished Guru Puja, and 4 police cars came into our property, and they stopped right in front of Srila Prabhupada's Bhajan Kuntir, and they got out of the car, some high-ranking officer and other guys with machine guns and rifles, and then lights were flashing, and they said, "We've come to arrest the Americans for being CIA agents." And so very quickly, my mind, what everyone else was thinking, I don't know, I said, well, Jananivas is English, he doesn't have to worry. And Prabhas, he's Indian, he doesn't have to worry. And so that left myself and Jayapataka Swami. So we were both Americans, and then they said, "Who's the Americans?" And then both Jayapataka and I raised our hands, and so the person in charge of this party, he says, "Well, we're going to arrest one of you." and then we'll come back later and get the other ones. And so immediately I thought, Jayapataka, he was more relevant and more important for the Mayapur project than I was. So I said, take me. And so the police, they had these iron chains. They put chains around my legs, around my hands, and around my back. And they took me to Krishnagar. And so they took me into the police station in Krishnagar, and I was just sitting there and sitting there and sitting there. And time was, 1 hour, 2 hours had passed, and I didn't. No one was telling me what's going on. What's going on? So what they had done was they had sent a special train from Calcutta to Krishnagar that was a prison train. It had a prison, it was just the main train part, and then a prison train. And then when that arrived, they put me in the prison, and I was handcuffed to the bars, and I couldn't move. And then they took me back to Calcutta. So in the meantime, they had called the American embassy, and they told the American embassy that they had captured a spy, one of their CIA agents. And so now this was a diplomatic situation, and it was America against India. So in those days, India was more friendly with the Russians than with the Americans, because America was friendly with Pakistan. And so they didn't like Americans so much. And so they took me to court, and the proceedings in the court, I had a lawyer from the American embassy, was a white guy, but they dressed like the British old style with the wig, put the wig on, and the black, And so for me, it was very comical to see all of this. It's like it's going on like this, but I didn't know what was going on, so I had to go to court several times, and eventually I was exonerated from those charges of being a spy. And so the penalty was that I would get life in prison or death for being a spy. So that was news to me later. So, but anyway, I was when I was exonerated, then the judge says, but we have an additional charge, and they had taken away my passport, and during that period of time, my visa had expired, and so the judge, he told me, he says, you have overstayed your visa, and now we're going to sentence you to 6 months in prison. So again, they handcuffed me and put me in the thing, and they took me to this prison, and I was in a line of men. They were all being put into the prison, and then when the guard, he saw me, he was a bit surprised, because I'm a clean shaved, my head was clean shaved, a young boy, saffron dhoti, like wearing tilak and everything. But they put me in a jail cell, and the jail cell was maybe 10 feet, 12 feet by 15 feet. So they put me in the thing, but the conditions were very bad because there was first there was no electricity, there was no chair or bed or anything, and there was no toilet. There was only a bucket. So in the corner there was a bucket and a clay pot full of water. And so when they put me in the cell, and when they closed the doors, the room was dark. You know, it was just like midnight. So you didn't know if it was day or night. And so, you know, Prabhupada would always say, make best use of a bad bargain. So what did I do? I would just chant all day long. I couldn't read a book, couldn't do anything. I just chant japa all day long. And I told them also in the prison that I'm not going to eat any of your food because I didn't know how they cooked it, and you know I was a very serious young boy, and I would have to wait for the devotees to bring me food from Calcutta. So because the temple was very far from the prison and there weren't so many devotees, so maybe once every 3 days or 4 days I would get some food. So the rest of the time I would have no food, and then once a week I could take a shower or a bucket bath, you know, like this, and this, you know, I just passed my time in this way. And so outside, of course, Srila Prabhupada, he was aware of my circumstances, and he was still working to spread his mission, you know, and at the same time translate his books. And so when my time was up and they released me from the prison, and then I went to Calcutta, Srila Prabhupada was there, and when he heard that I had come, he immediately called me in his room, and he was eating his lunch, and so he gave me a little bit of food that he had that he was going to eat. He gave me that food, and I ate that, and then he asked me, he says, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, Prabhupada, I'm okay." He says, "Do you want to go back to America?" And I said, "No, Prabhupada, I want to go back to Mayapur, and I want to continue doing my service in Mayapur." And so this made him very happy. And then he began to tell me a story. And he says, yes, there was this boy, this little boy, and he was also a devotee of Krishna. And he loved Krishna so much that he loved more than his father. And his father became so angry that he would try to punish the boy in so many ways. Of course, I knew he was talking about Prahlad Maharaj, you know, how Hiranyakashipu tormented his own son. But to know that Srila Prabhupada was always aware of his disciples, the efforts they were going through to help him with his mission. Then if you read the seventh canto, which is where they talk about Prahlad Maharaj, so Prabhupada mentions me in that book. So he doesn't use my name, but he says that yes, the Indian government, they are arresting my boys as CIA agents. So So I'm the only one who got arrested. So this means that even when Prabhupada was translating, he was thinking of me. So, but any of these hardships that you had to go through, they were irrelevant. You didn't care because, at least for me, my motivation was, I have to do something for to because of my gratitude that I had, because we go through so many lifetimes until we can have darshan with a pure devotee, and I knew that I'd been so fortunate. Okay, Hare Krishna.
Are your memories all recorded in one place, Prabhu?
I have so many stories. For many years, I never, I never wrote a book, and I never told these stories because I didn't do it for pratista, adoration. Whatever I did because I love Prabhupada. But since I've been living here, so many devotees have come, and I've spoken, and they've recorded many things. If anything gets printed or whatever, I don't care. So, I couldn't write a book and try and sell it because, I'm not going to write a book and try to make money, So I couldn't do that. So I guess tomorrow someone else will come and speak. So my 3 days is up today, but I have many stories. Yes.
Would you share what was the most amazing thing about Prabhupada for you personally?
To me, the most amazing thing was his determination. He had been given instructions by Bhaktisiddhanta, and he did everything to, fulfill the desires of his Guru Maharaj. And so he's the Acharya, so he teaches by example. So this is what I tried to emulate in my life. It's it's like being in a foreign country with no money, no place to stay, being locked up in a dark room for 6 months. This is nothing, So, and then Prabhupada was my savior. He saved me, and he was determined to fulfill this prophecy of Lord Chaitanya that all over the world. So in his short time that he stayed with us, he accomplished so much. So many books he translated, and temples opened around the world, and from morning till night he was always preaching. So he gave us the way in which, if we want to go back to Godhead, we have to follow in the footsteps of the Acharyas. So for all of us, we have to make a determination that every day we're going to become stronger. And Maya, material energy, she's going to be combating us every day, trying to, convince us that to stay here in this material world is a good thing. But if we remain determined and follow strictly the instructions of the Guru Maharaj, then eventually Maya will say, okay, I can see that you are a serious boy, you are a serious girl. I won't bother you anymore. So, okay, Hare Krishna. Yes? Hare Krishna.
Singapore, why they put you in blacklist?
They wouldn't tell me. Yeah. So I asked him, why am I, and he says, we don't have to tell you. So over the years, this was like in 1970 when I got on the blacklist, but even over the years in the 80s or later, I've tried to go to Singapore and no, you can't. So they don't have to tell. So Singapore's a very strict country.
Like Muslim preaching. Muslim preaching you did.
Yeah, but we wanted to preach. There's devotees in Singapore. They have a temple there, but if they see you wearing neck beads or like this, then they'll kick you out, kick you out of the country.
I heard about that. Vishnu Maharaj, they went there, they had one civil dress.
Yeah. There are many
That's
places.
why I was wondering what was the there are devotees over there. Just what was the against it?
Yeah, because it's just they're crazy. They have almost like a dictator because it's a matriarchal. The father. It's kind of like North Korea, because, but it's modern and fancy. So.
I went there in '94 and the temple's called the Shiv Mandir.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mount Batten Road.
Yeah.
Wow.